today's subject is conjuring. Now, this will be a advanced subject at one point in the series, but at this point it's pretty basic, and it's in fact a good place to start. So when we talk about conjuring, what we're actually talking about is the true form of what many in the modern age call manifestation. The idea of making something happen in reality. Now, this does contradict modern science, and this is where most people kind of stop at this point. And the idea that you can change the laws of nature with something other than basic application of physics doesn't really make sense until you start thinking on the quantum level. And with quantum mechanics coming out and showing the concepts that what we observe changes based on there being an observer and how it's observed, shows that there is actuality to this. So even within the structures of our collective understanding, these things are becoming well known. Now, in magic, this has always been well known. This is the main function in a lot of senses of magic, is to conjure something. Now, when we're talking about conjuring in this sense, I am going to define this as non-somatic, basically, to say not actually causing something to happen by touching it. And so what you're actually doing when you're conjuring most of the time is, rather than using your physical form or your electric form to affect something, you're using your emotions or your thoughts. This takes us to where we're actually considering what conjuring is. That in one sense it is something you do, but not you as in your physical form. There are higher versions of you behind you and beyond you that we call our higher selves. And the actual being that is involved in doing the conjuring is the higher self. You as a human being don't physically or spiritually comprehend what you're doing to this physical world when you conjure. And so we don't actually have that power or the right to wield that kind of power in that sense. Instead, the act of conjuring requires you to open up to a higher self, something deeper within you than your ego. So the kinds of people who look into magic and are seeking to use it for selfish purposes and to kind of just acquire the physical things they want, they'll meet a roadblock with conjuring, because conjuring requires you to have an inner connection with your higher self. And once you have that connection, you will know that there's certain things you don't want to use this skill for. And that's what this series is about. It's going to go through all of the different phenomena you may experience and the different things you may see and come across as you develop this skill. But just for this class, as the basics, I want to show you how to use this. So we've addressed in a way what it is. But what I really want to explain is the actual function of what you're doing here. So the world we perceive as the physical world is a minor world nested in greater and greater worlds. This is different than the idea of the layer cake of worlds you see in many mainstream religions. The idea that there's a physical world for people who are fresh or something like that, and then there is a world of darkness for those who make mistakes, a world of light for those who do good, or there's just neutral realms. But either way, this layering system, that's not a system that conjuring actually functions in. The reality is it's much more like a sphere. This is the higher worlds, and then the lower worlds are inside that. So when you're using magic in a higher world, it will precipitate and affect the lower worlds. So to do an act of conjuring, you must be in touch with or enter a higher state. Once you're in that higher state, you can then perform an act of conjury or manifestation. And when you do that, it comes down into this world and happens. The skill is knowing how to create similarity within the worlds and make it happen the way you want it to. For example, if you wanted $1 million, you can't just go into a higher world, imagine $1 million, and then it appears, because the way you are in the higher world changes. You're well beyond just an English-speaking American or something that has dollar bills in your life. You have every currency. You have every world of understanding in the higher realms. And so the things you want in this one incarnation of yourself become very petty. So you have to aim higher in order to get something that the higher self actually wants. I hope that makes sense. So say you didn't want to change the desire. Say you still want that $1 million. Well, 1 million pieces of paper don't matter much, or 1 million pieces of electricity don't matter much to the higher self. But something like great comfort in life or great joy does. Now, if you can find a way to convince yourself that that money will actually give you that, then maybe you can find a way to convince your higher self of that through the means by which you're seeking to use it. And you start kind of campaigning it. But this is fighting against the waves. And your conjuring skills, they'll develop very good this way. This is a good way to develop your skills, but your results will be, here and there. The actual way to get good results is to know what your higher self wants. This is done through concentration. Sit and relax and connect with your higher self. And this is something that you need to learn for this subject. So I'm going to teach you right now. Your higher self is the part of you that lives forever. It's that simple. There's a part of you that is immortal, and when your body dies, it's still there. It's still you. Imagine what you would be like if this was the case. Just think about it for a second. If you lived eternally, meaning not 1,000 years, not 1,000,000 years, you never die. Doesn't that explain why you're here right now, why you're in the situation you're in right now? Because there's nothing else to experience at this point. You've constructed an entire universe. And now you've stopped. And you are dwelling within your construction. Conjuring is the act of picking back up the tools of construction to work on the universe as you are within the universe. It is one of the most sacred arts of humankind, and that's why it's so secretive and it's so quiet. In truth, we all do it all the time, but it's on autopilot. It's running from the higher self, and the higher self isn't seeking to change. It's zoning out into it intentionally, becoming you, the thing in the conjuring. So you have to divest to pull away from the actual manifestation that is occurring. Separate yourself from it mildly in order to affect it. Now, when you do these things, you'll get in touch with the higher self. You'll know what the part of you that lives forever wants, because you will have considered, what would you be like if you live forever? Because that's what you're like. And your physical body has made slight shoves at that. Your society has shoved it. Your religion, all these things have shoved you off of your pattern a little. And now you're like over here. And so you line up with your higher self. Don't try to force your higher self to line up with where you're at right now. That's going to botch all of your magical skills. This doesn't mean you have to become a holy person or something like that. In fact, it's usually the opposite for people who are striving this far. At this point, you've tried to become a holy person, and now you have a bunch of fake behaviors that aren't actually you. These served you to this point, but it's up to you to realize when these things no longer serve you and to remove them from yourself. At this point, you begin to work with your own constitution and correct it into what you actually wanted it to be, rather than what everybody else changed it into. This is a great part of the human awakening, is to regain your ability to choose what you do. And here's the big one. If you can't choose what you do, how do you expect to change anyone or anything else with magical power? How do you expect to conjure something else if you're not even in control of you? If you're not in control of you, then it's not really you who conjured the thing you conjure. So you have to gain autonomy from everything. Everything, no matter what it is, no matter who it is or what organization, everything. Autonomy from everything. You for the sake of you, not for the sake of saving someone or learning something, just you as you. Pure you. That might not be a great person to be around at first, and you're the one who has to be with you, but the truth is that your pure self is the person you need to be to do any growing. You become that, and then it grows into the higher self that you're meant to be. So lining up with the higher self allows you to inevitably conjure, but it does so many more things too. It betters you. It brings you into that space where you're actually who you want to be, and that makes you trust yourself. When you trust yourself, it makes your magical skills a lot better, because it's a requirement of love and will, which are the magical components. So the actual power here relies in using all of that faith within the self and lining up with the will of the self. And then doing what I call conjuring. Now, conjuring is distinct from ritual in this way. A ritual requires preparation, activation, activity, and then relax, regard, and separate from it, and then it manifests. Ritual's a lot more elaborate and a lot easier for beginners and a lot more effective usually until you get a skill about this. In the end, if you are a talented conjurer, you won't do ritual anymore. You'll most likely conjure all the time. Whereas ritual is all of that, conjury is an action. It's an action designed to cause an effect that is not really predictable with basic physics. You kind of have to use metaphysics, but it's not a good term. It's not. The actual thing you're doing is you're lining up with your higher self and then performing a mundane action only as the higher self. And that causes a shift. So let me show you a good example of conjuring. I'm going to give you some examples so that you know how to do this. Now, it doesn't always work, and that's the thing. In ritual, I can guarantee a lot of effectiveness. With this, you need a lot of practice, and you have to keep putting faith in it. So the first kind of conjuring tactic or trick you want to do is to start learning how to cause manifestation. There's a lot of people who think about this as synchronicity. So what you're doing is you're trying to manifest synchronicities. This is to say, pick right now for yourself an animal. Any just vague animal, so not something too complicated, just an